And welcome to this meeting of the Scottish Affairs Committee. I'm very grateful to the representatives of the trade unions for coming today. We're really looking forward to the evidence session that we have ahead of us. I'm going to begin by asking a couple of questions. So I'll just do that, if that's okay. And this would be addressed to all of you. What is your view of the place of oil and gas in the UK's path to net zero? Is that something that you would have a position on? I'll start with you then, Derek.
Yes, so obviously oil and gas is a major part of the economy. It's a major part of jobs, particularly in Scotland, but right across the supply chain in the UK, including manufacturing. So we still see a major role for oil and gas in terms of energy security, but also around how we can transition those people who are currently in oil and gas jobs right across the UK and supply chain into greener and more sustainable jobs. The problem at this point in time is that the plan for greener and sustainable jobs just isn't in place at this point in time. And you will hear the term just transition, I think, which was coined by the trade union movement. But we've seen the first test of a just transition at Grangemouth, and unfortunately we've failed massively. There's 400 jobs directly going to go there. PricewaterhouseCoopers' own report into that closure means that 2,822 jobs will go as a direct result of that in Grangemouth, and it will lose 403 million to the local Grangemouth economy. So that's the first step of what we are seeing in a just transition process. If you were to multiply that across some of the areas in Scotland, including Aberdeen and the North East, you will see a catastrophic effect on local economy and jobs. So until the skills are in place, until renewable fuels are there and in place, we must pace this properly and make sure that a just transition takes place. So we still see oil and gas as part and parcel of the economy and building a sustainable future, and we will look at how we can transition away. We've already produced a number of reports which show that you can create up to 36,000 jobs in renewable energies, but you can't just do it overnight. It's not a flick of the switch that's needed here. And also, we've got the massive issue of energy security with the current global crisis that's going on. So our view is that we must pace this properly, make sure there is a just transition for workers and that the economy does not stumble as a result of fast-tracked eco-policies that seem to be driven through without due consideration to not just communities, but workers and the economy.
We will come to Grangemouth later in the session, so we'll try not to go into that in too much detail at the beginning of the meeting. But Ian, did you want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Good morning, committee. Yeah, look, clearly renewable energy is the future of the UK's energy supply. We know that that's the right direction to go in, but it really would be catastrophic to exit from oil and gas too quickly. We know the devastation that would cause. I think it's been well articulated to this committee and across the board the kind of devastation that would cause. So I would say that oil and gas, absolutely. Our members have a view that it has to be part of the solution. Everybody knows and everyone's clearly aware that it can't go on forever. We know that. But moving away from it too quickly will cause a level of devastation to local communities and the national economy that would just be unsustainable. We believe there's solutions. There's obviously ways of abating the impact, particularly gas, but oil and gas. And I think that there can occasionally be a lack of focus, for example, on carbon capture. We think that has to be part of the mix in terms of making progress. But to answer the question directly, oil and gas has to be part of the future. There's no way to avoid that in our view. We think it can be done positively. We think it can be done in a way that moves workers from having that are specialising in oil and gas to the renewable sector. We think it is absolutely doable. But a rush and being ending the oil and gas is interwoven into the communities all across Scotland and the UK, and a rush away from that would cause real devastation.
Robert.
Thank you. Good morning, committee. The UK government is committed to making the UK a clean superpower energy in the world, but less than a year since this was pledged, by 2030 this is when we're pledging it. It just looks unrealistic. Oil and gas still has a major role to play in the UK. It's Scotland, an oil-producing nation. We cannot move away from this too quickly. what my colleagues said, yes, we know it's not going to be here forever, but to switch that off overnight, essentially, put all these jobs at risk. We've been out speaking to members over the past few months, and many of these workers have seen this movie before. That's what they're telling us. They're very upset. They've been part of the Ravenscraig when that closed down, other major industries that have closed down. We need to. Oil and gas still has a major role to play in the UK.
Thank you. With reference to the North Sea transition deal, what involvement have the trade unions had in that?
So there's been a level. There's been I think a fair level of engagement at Scottish Government level. I think our engagement through the Just Transition Commission has been really significant. So I think it's to a certain degree that there has been engagement. I think that engagement has to be absolutely fundamental, though. We can't be a tag on to the process at the end. When we look at, for example, NISO reports, we see that all three governments, all three GB governments are referred to, and then it says we will also engage with private enterprise. We would like to focus to say we'll engage with three governments, we'll engage with all unions involved and private enterprise. So I think, to be fair to the various agencies involved, there's been an effort to reach out through the process, but we would say that workers have to be at the very centre of this, and to do that we have to be, when it's being put together, when the terms of reference are being put together, the trade union movement have to be in the room. Otherwise we're concerned that we won't have buy-in as the process moves forward.
Anyone like to add?
I think, yeah, I mean, it was communicated that with energy unions, a Self-Unite prospect, they want to set up a TUC Energy Council. I mean, that sounds great, and yeah, the workers really do need to have their voice in this. The workers are the ones, and not just in the oil, gas, the GB energy, the renewable energy, but all the supply chains that are involved in the delivery of energy to our homes. They all need to have a voice in a say in how we move this forward.
Yeah, so I think engagement with the North Sea Transition Agency is welcome, and I think there has been a couple of meetings at high level, we'll call it that. Where we need to do is start to look at more focused areas of work, what part of that is going to look at. We do have some concerns with the agency as it stands. They seem to be almost in a rush to end some of the exploration and some of the drilling, and I know there is a plan in place with the UK government to do that, but we've got specific examples such as the Griffin field offshore where they've just tried to shut that down. It's actually, I think it's in court. Actually, I think it's a judicial review on it. So there seems to be an acceleration by the North Sea Transition Agency to move away from oil and gas a lot quicker than what companies, unions and others seem to be. So we would just, as Unite, would probably say that we need further engagement at that level for it to be more specified in terms of the debate that takes place at these meetings. We can't just have a sort of a wide focus in oil's bad, green is good. We need to have a more focused debate around where the jobs are going to come from, and that is, I'll keep going back to that, is the lack of planning in terms of where jobs are actually going to be created across those new and emerging industries.
Thank you for that. I'm going to pass to Harriet Cross now.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. My name's Harriet Cross. I'm MP for Gordon and Buchan, which is Aberdeenshire, so obviously a huge impact on my area if this goes wrong. Has any of you, or have any of you, looked at what the difference may be in job losses versus if the basin, North Sea Basin, was allowed to decline naturally and manage versus, for example, not permitting new licences and expediting the decline that way? Has there been any analysis in the breakdown of job losses in situation A versus situation B? Yeah, so we've done analysis across the North Sea. We produced a report which shows where we can create jobs. And what's happening in the North Sea is that there's a lack of confidence by the oil and gas operators that the UK government is going to support them through this transition process. So what that's leading to is companies expediting their exit. Total, as I mentioned, are shutting down the Griffin field. We've also got TACA, who are starting to look at a decommissioning programme right across the North Sea. And whereas you will see a large hit in places such as Grangemouth, as I mentioned earlier on, the TACA decommissioning programme is going to lose 2,000 jobs over the next 5 years, but you won't see a big hit. It'll be 500, it'll be 200 here. Then in 3 months' time, there's another redundancy. Then in 6 months' time, there's another redundancy. And that's been echoed right through the North Sea operators. So this is almost what I would say is death by 1,000 cuts, Chair. And
as I keep going back to what Harriet's saying, is that we don't have the plan to get those new jobs back into places these go. What we'll see in Scotland is, unfortunately, a skills exodus as people start to leave the country looking for work. There's plenty of work for scaffolders who work offshore to go to Hinkley Point C. So we see that skills exodus at a time when we need skills to rebuild or to build and start to build a green economy. So we're in a catch-22 and we need to get it right. So I think there is a lot of jobs that are going to be lost. And of course, in your area, the knock-on effect to businesses, hotels, restaurants, that whole thing. If you've ever been to Aberdeen Airport, which I'm sure you have, dominated by hotels and the oil and gas industry. So if that's not there, I think that's going to be a devastating effect. So the jobs that are going to be replacing it, we're just not seeing how they're going to be done at this point in time.
And if I could just, thanks, Chair, to come in that, I think that's absolutely well articulated. I think there's various research has shown that it will be catastrophic if not managed properly. Not least, Professor DeLu from Robert Gordon University speaks very well on this. Not only direct jobs, though, as you'll be well aware. And as referred to by Derek, a massive impact on local communities that are unseen, that support these industries. 1,000 oil and gas jobs probably means a multiple of that in terms of job losses, and the knock-on effects across the community. And again, we would emphasise that this will be a Westminster, a UK problem to resolve, but it's going to be a catastrophic problem for local constituents to live, and that's why I think joined up approach on this at the UK, Scottish Government and the various different agencies absolutely essential, and emphasise that the workers' voice in this has to be absolutely central.
Thank you.
You can ask a supplementary.
Again, it's been perfectly articulated, but I mean, just last month the GB chair stated it was going to take at least 20 years just to create 1,000 jobs. I mean, we don't want to think how many jobs will be lost in that 20 years due to no new drilling projects, licences not being produced. So it's a worrying time. We visited the Sullenvo platform only last week to meet with workers there, and what that does for the local community in Shetland is massive. I mean, if that was to go, the damage would be, we wouldn't be able to recover from it.
Thank you. Supplementary.
I have to disclose that I've got a stake in a parts business for wind farms. In my honest opinion, there will only be a fraction of the number of jobs in renewables than there is in the oil industry. Because, in fact, they employ very few people from my experience, and it's quite substantial experience.
What's your question, Angus?
Do you agree?
Well, if I could, Chair, look, that's a real problem, and of course wind farms are staffed in a different way, and it's not as labour intensive, if you like. I think where policymakers can assist massively is in ensuring that the supply chain is focused on ensuring that jobs in Britain are created and sustained and maintained. The world that we're currently in and we live in, that capital investment is obviously very important to the process currently, but that investment must come with strings, and those strings have to be attached by policymakers to say local communities have to benefit, and a key way for local communities to benefit is for local jobs to be created. Now, if that means a wind turbine being created, designed, components being made in Newcastle or whatever, or the Humber, that still massively has knock-on and positive effects to the northeast of Scotland and Scotland more broadly. So I think that's where we risk making a massive mistake in not ensuring that our supply chains are benefiting GB properly, and we're not allowing companies who are driven the way companies are to ensure that the profits, and many of them are socially responsible, but clearly profit is a main driver, and we ensure that they're purchasing in a way that benefits the British supply chain and has on the positive effect. So I think you're absolutely right on the face of it, and on the ground there's less staff around, but I think there is a way with policy levers to ensure that the supply chain is invested in, and the benefits are in Britain.
I think we have a site at Methil, the former Bifab, Harland and Wolff and now Navantia, that's a workforce ready and waiting to build wind turbines, but there's no jobs coming, and these turbines are coming in from abroad.
Chair, just to comment on that point, Angus, there. So you're right that the jobs gap that could be created on this is massive, but as my colleagues have articulated well, there, with the proper investment and building in the UK in particular, we could get jobs created. I mean, our reports are showing us that if you were to use UK steel, for instance, not important, and given what's going on globally, that may be the best action. You could create 12,500 jobs through offshore wind manufacturing if it was here in the UK. 12,100 for wind power operations. 6,500 jobs could be created in decommissioning, but we may be in a position where we're dragging these installations miles away to decommission them somewhere else, where we've got massive ports available to us. We've got the green ports currently, Cromarty Firth, the biggest deep water port in Europe, which is going to need to be utilised. We've got the Forth ports as well. We've got areas which has been mentioned before around carbon capture, and under Project Acorn, unfortunately Scotland has missed out on Project Acorn, and we're hopeful that in Tranche 2 that some carbon capture work could come to Scotland. So there is options for the Scottish workforce to take, but it's going to need a bit of bold investment from the UK, both in regulatory terms and also in investment terms. But, we're not, I don't think anybody's saying, British jobs for British workers, but let's start manufacturing in this country. If you look at what we do currently, the manufacturing base is literally been ripped apart. There will be no manufacturing in the central belt of Scotland come 2026 unless we start to get some movement in terms of some of the stuff that will be coming out of Project Willow. So we believe there are options on the table. It's just about how both the UK and the Scottish governments want to take forward those issues. But manufacturing in the UK would lead to substantial job increases and would be able to replace a number of those jobs, which is obviously of a concern to this committee and both the UK and Scottish governments that may go.
Thank you. Kirsty Sullivan.
Thank you very much, Chair. You have touched on some of the points, but I'd just like to ask all of you what key elements you would like to see included in the UK government's plan for the future of the North Sea.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, on you go.
Yeah, well, look, first of all, again, reiterate this, and apologies, but I think it has to involve a worker and community voice. That has to be at the absolute centre of it. Now, in a way, that's just words, and in a way, people will always say, yes, we will consult with communities and workers. But we would ask, and I think it's fundamentally important that workers are at the centre of it, at the formation, and are at the table. And look, it's not lost on me. We're invited here today, and we really appreciate it, etc. Right, so it's not lost on us. But I think that has to be important. Where similar positive changes have been made, right, and people speak about what happened in northern France and a number of other areas. When those countries have been going through such a change, they've ensured that they would refer to unions as social partners, and when companies and private investment are mentioned, they will, alongside that, say social partners, referring to unions. I think that's vitally important that we're there from day one. I think one really important thing is getting clarity to people as soon as possible. It's regular now that members will say, I'm in the energy industry and I live in Scotland, but realistically I might have to look at other options. Now, even creating that doubt in people's mind has a knock-on effect. In the same way, capital investment will be afraid of having stranded assets, or whatever they describe it as when they make massive investments. Individuals make real investments in their career, in their knowledge base, and in terms of settling roots and families and constituencies across Scotland. Giving certainty to people is really important. We know how hard that is, but I would say a long-term solution that is not going to be is not going to move with the changes in wind direction. Excuse the reference to wind direction, but that we have something that people can rely on, so that apprentices and people who are studying energy can say, you know what, this is a career that I can be in, as opposed to, you know what, we might get a different flavour of government, or we might get a different flavour of policy, or something new that's going to knock this off. So I think a real picture and a real vision for energy and for people to be able to build careers in it is absolutely essential, and that's what we would ask for.
Chair, before anyone else answers, if I can just pick up one of your points, Ian. So I understand the point you're making around the need for clarity and certainty to allow people to plan for futures of themselves, their families, their communities. Do you think in order to have that long-term view, there needs to be more consensus within the political landscape as to what the future looks like, so that we don't have changes in direction?
Yeah, I think that will be welcome. I think there's no doubt about it. I think the more consensus there is around that, the more stability there is. And it also has knock-on effects in terms of when there is a change in what the next energy is in vogue. And are we talking hydrogen this week and less about wind? And we should be a bit nervous if you're in wind. Hydrogen's exciting. Now we're on to carbon capture, and now we're on to then we're on to nuclear. And it needs to be less about what's in vogue. And we need to have, I think our members need to have confidence that we're Scottish, governments of all colours and across all parties are moving in that direction. Now, to the point of what would give that level of stability for somebody just graduating and becoming an apprentice, I think communication is key, and I think what's said by central government and what long-term strategies, long-term plans is key. But I am sorry to harp on about it. But one thing that would be absolutely fundamentally important is that confidence in knowing that community engagement and worker engagement is going to happen at every level. That just transition isn't kind of something niche in Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales, but that it is a UK approach, and that just transition is going to be at the centre of it. I think that gives people that would give people real confidence around this, as opposed to feeling at the mercy of the next popular technology.
Thank you.
Yes, I mean, in any plan going forward, there's a couple of things that I think needs to be explored, and that is, it's fine for the UK government to be aspirational in terms of its policies in green and renewable energies, but there's a number of key questions that I don't think have been asked. One is around security of supply for oil and gas currently in the global economic crisis, security of jobs, and the security of the economy. And I think those have to be the three critical things that the UK government asks itself. If we are going to effectively turn off the taps in the North Sea, now, the North Sea does not have a lifespan of 150 years, it's got a lifespan of 30 to 40 years. Some of those basins that are currently being extracted from are being turned off while there's still oil that we could take out of them. So there seems to be almost a rush at the Department of Energy to push through a number of aspirational ideas, we'll call them, in terms of green policies. And I don't think that the plan has been very well thought out, and I think we need to be going back to basics. And I think there is a danger in government setting policies for 5 years or for the terms of their government. They need to be bolder than that and start to be setting longer term targets that everybody's signing up to. I mean, inside the Scottish Government, Scottish Parliament, I've never seen consensus like it ever in terms of trying to make sure that Grangemouth and the renewable sector was being rebuilt. We had everybody, including the Greens, maybe the Lib Dems weren't, but everybody, including the Greens, were backing up to that. And we need that kind of widespread political consensus across UK government as well to make policy that's going to last. But the policy can't be that we're just going to turn off the taps in the North Sea and hope that something new is going to come across the horizon. I mean, when you see the outcomes of Project Willow, which I know you won't have because it's just been published, but you will see there's some longer term, really high ambitious stuff in that, but they're really ambitious and they're going to take time. And are going to take a lot of cost analysis to see if they are going to be viable while we've currently got other things ongoing. So I think for us, it's really a case of getting the governments to sit down and talk to us more about where the plans are going to be in terms of where are the jobs going to be created if you turn off one source. I think my General Secretary uses the term, you can't let go of one rope until you've got hold of the other, and that's absolutely correct. So we want to see things moving forward, we want to see progression, but again, we don't want to see it at the expense of jobs and communities.
I mean, government originally pledged 8.3 billion over the lifetime of this Parliament for the GB Energy. That so far in the October budget, it was only 100 million. It's materialised. Obviously, a lot was then put on defence spending, had to be increased due to the geopolitical situation in the world. But I think due to the geopolitical situation in the world, this is the time to protect our natural oil and gas energy rather than import it. My colleague from Unite, Derek, said there that about turning off. Apache Oil closed a facility that was producing 14,000 barrels a day. We just closed that down, and now we're importing that oil. That makes no sense. So in this time of uncertainty in the world, from a lot of these countries that are producing the oil that we're importing, we need to keep investing in our own.
Thank you. And if I could just ask yourself, Derek,
yep.
You spoke earlier about Unite having a plan to create 35,000 new energy transition jobs by 2030. Can I just ask what that plan involves? And I think all members of the committee would be quite interested in seeing that plan, having a copy to better understand.
Yeah, so I'll
if that could be supplied.
Yeah, I will speak to our General Secretary this afternoon when I get back to the office. So the plan is basically looking at what we, so there's been a full skills analysis matrix done which shows where comparable jobs are, what skills are needed. It's almost, a matrix. I don't think that's been done by the UK government at all, to look at, if you work in the North Sea and you work on a platform and you're a scaffolder, because they do scaffolding and oil rigs in the North Sea, what are your transferable jobs and how can you then move forward? And of course we had the announcement of the trial, the skills passport, of course, which is welcome, but I don't think it goes far enough yet. So what our plan has done is look at where we have existing infrastructure and then what we can do with transferring those jobs over. But more importantly, as I think as a reference to Angus's point earlier on, this is about bringing manufacturing back into the UK so that we're not reliant on those overseas. We're not having a wind turbine pulled across the sea, causing more emissions than a lot of places would. If you want to talk about energy emissions and how that affects it. So it's very detailed in terms of where the jobs would be available should the investment come in. Our report talks around costing of 5.5 billion to create that investment, and that would be, things like looking at areas like Ravenscraig. Could that be a place that could be repurposed or converted again, reopened back up to create steel in Scotland that could push the manufacturing forward? And also just looking across the whole supply chain of how things are moved and what jobs could be created across there. But also looking at, should carbon capture be accelerated, then that would create obviously jobs in Scotland. So those are things that we think are actual things that the government should have been looking at from the start, rather than just making policy announcements on, green energy emissions or no new build of electric car or no new build of petrol and diesel cars, because that demand is still going to be there. So that is there. I will speak to the General Secretary about getting details of that to you at some point. But just on Robert's point, I think that there is something really important here, which is, I did reference it, which is around energy security and job security. We've just seen the defence budget increase of spending quite significantly. But part and parcel of that has to be your energy security. We're going to be talking about, when we talk about Grangemouth, we're going to be potentially talking about a massive import of oil coming from China into this country, rather than we've got our own energy fuel security issues to look at. So all those things come into it, but the jobs would be created in this country, manufacturing would be created in this country, and that would generate a green economy and create those jobs that would be able for people to transfer over with the skills that match them. But that's going to need regulatory change as well to make sure that people can be covered. I mean, there is issues around, energy security, but some of these areas that we're importing from have got terrible human rights records, got terrible environmental records, and all those things are being pushed, and that's what we're going to be bringing in. Our environmental climate targets, by the way, you can't, I know they seem to do it, but you can't just pass that around the world, which is effectively what we'll be doing if we don't get our energy security and policies in place.
Thank you.
Over to Elaine Stewart now.
Good morning. You've probably answered quite a few of my questions, but we'll just tease them out a wee bit more. When the North Sea oil ceases oil and gas, will there be enough clean energy jobs in the sector?
Just briefly on that, thanks. Look, I think we have to aspire to have the same amount of jobs that we have now. I think we absolutely have to aspire to have that, and probably more, because obviously there's going to be year-on-year growth. I think there has to be the ambition. Peoples have set up their lifestyles, societies and communities exist to service those jobs. So I think it should be approached in a way that there should be no tolerance for having less jobs and less incomes for people. We think that is achievable. with the right imagination, the right focus, the right government focus, that is achievable. And things like, we've mentioned it a few times, but things like carbon capture and the plant at Peterhead. I mean, there was real disappointment about some noises that were coming from just various sources about some doubts on carbon capture, and it is a complex topic. But that's really unhelpful to hear that there's doubts in that direction, and understandably, Public Accounts Committee have questions about, are we going to get value and are we taking a risk? But we are absolutely forthright that government does actually need to take some risks sometimes, and sometimes needs to invest in technologies that are not 100% guaranteed. But the outcomes of that, even if there's criticism, but the outcomes of that are clearly there of benefit. So we think with enough imagination, with enough investment, we can ensure that there is no loss in jobs in the energy market. Scotland obviously is positioned well in terms of ensuring that it can lead the world in terms of wind technologies and in terms of the geographical advantages of it. So I think we should approach it with a net zero tolerance for net job losses. I think that's how we should approach it.
And what barriers might stop oil and gas workers moving over to the clean energy sector?
Well, I think colleagues, I think when it comes to specialist engineers, when it comes to specialist staff, generally speaking, around 80% of people should find it fairly easy to move from one to the other. I think the skills passport, as Derek said earlier, is definitely a positive as well. But there is a challenge, and this is where I do think that government and agencies need to be mindful of it. That sometimes a geographical move is really important. It can be really important to companies. Companies will say, well, this is not viable if we set it up in X location. It has to be in Y location. And we think it's important that there is government and agency pressure to say, well, no, the societal and the community benefit is for you to stay where you currently do it. So if you might have someone in the northeast of Scotland, and you might say, well, you can now work in Newcastle, you can now work on the east coast. Well, we think that actually companies should be incentivised to not just keep jobs in Scotland, keep jobs in the UK, but to keep them in the local communities that they're current in. And there should be a premium for the employers to do that. But if they don't do that, then you're still carrying the risk of decimating those communities.
What type of jobs would not transition?
So, well, just briefly, I think that as a percent, we're talking in percentage terms. So, generally speaking, the more specialised roles can transfer from oil and gas to renewables. Generally speaking, and it's thought that less specialised roles don't transfer. But Derek mentioned scaffolders, and look, that's very straightforward in terms of transferring them into the economy. I think there are specific roles that can't move across on paper. But there's also the existence of roles where employers will say, you know what, we don't want to spend any of our capital moving those employees. We could spend a year retraining them, but we don't want to spend that. So I think that when it's said a worker can't move across, we experience in that on a daily basis where an employer says, well, employee X can't possibly do role Y. And we sit and speak to them and analyse this and say, actually, all they need is a 6-month retraining course. I'm not saying it's as simple as that, but I think there has to be real scrutiny when companies say that people can't transfer from one role to another.
And last question, to what extent do you agree with the Climate Challenge Committee Chief Executive statement that there will be a failure of communication by government to oil and gas workers about the forthcoming transition?
Yeah, let me go.
Yeah, sorry, but yeah. Look, I think it's a very difficult. To be fair to everybody, it's a very difficult message to land. There's a lot of people maybe don't want to see it. A lot of people will think, well, I'm in the industry for the next 20 years and I'm okay. So it's a very difficult message to land. I do think that at UK level and Scottish Government level, I do think that both governments and various agencies could do more to ensure that people know that this is an urgent problem that needs to be resolved. I think there is a communication gap there, and I think some of that is because there is a lot of instability in the background. People are perhaps perhaps afraid to communicate how stark this will be. But I think when the plan is in place, the plan is solidified, then it's going to be easier to communicate. But I think there is legitimate criticism, but it is a difficult message to communicate.
So, just on that, so I think there is a number of factors in this. Jobs have went in the North Sea. Data gathered from Offshore Energy's UK and experience showed the number of jobs directly employed in Scotland's oil and gas sectors have slumped from 117,900 in 2013 to just 74,100 in 2022. So I had this same conversation with a Cabinet Secretary for Energy in Scotland and the Deputy First Minister when we were talking about jobs, and they were saying, well, we've not seen the great fall-off of jobs yet. We've not seen a massive amount of unemployment in Scotland, because even though we've got this massive drop-off of jobs. And what I was trying to say to them was, well, this is a tipping point now. We're going to get to a point where these jobs are not going to be there at all. At some point, there'll be people there who don't have a job to transfer over to. And just on, I know she's away just now, but there's a further 61% fall in the estimated number of oil and of induced jobs in Scotland that are only viable in the wider economy because of oil and gas industry, like restaurants and grocery stores. The fall from 50,600 in 2013 to 19,500 in 2022. So you can see that scale of drop-off. And I think what alarmed me about the Scottish Government Minister's view was that, well, we've not seen any high levels of unemployment yet, so why should we be worried about it? And I think, well, we're going to get to a tipping point in some areas, that unless we go down the route of investment in creating jobs, which I've referenced earlier on, around how we bring manufacturing back to Scotland, how we start to do stuff in-house, not to outsource as much, and to look at credible energy security policies, which means we are building, manufacturing and producing in the UK.
Thank you. Mr Angus MacDonald.
I was going to ask about training, effectively. Clearly there's a big issue, the transition and the different skill sets, and we're not going to have a match like this. And so the real issue is, what can we do to help that transition better from a perspective of training?
I think, we were out meeting the workers out in Methil that worked from the Banty now. At the time it was Harland and Wolff, during when it was obviously in the process of being bought over, and they had plans to build up a training academy within their grounds or site to bring through apprentices rather than move them about all over the place. But with the uncertainty of contracts and jobs, they can't push that funding towards it. So there just needs to be more focus on giving these companies a certainty on contracts, so they can bring these contracts in, know the jobs are there, jobs are secure, and then they can push on investing in their training of younger workforces. So, because it is an ageing workforce, so they're replaceable in the future.
If I could, I think that's a really good point. I think just going back to something I mentioned earlier, but I think the onus and responsibility of this needs to be on those who will be making significant profits, let's face it, from their investments. And I think as that investment comes in, I think it's incredibly important that a percentage of that is put aside for this retraining. And again, at a local level, or when a local decision is being made about allocating capital, naturally investors will say, well, that, we want to hire people who are trained. But I think there should be, again, strings attached for community benefit, from worker benefit, and for training benefit to make sure that that's covered. It can sometimes be a default of an employer to say, well, these people don't have the skills and we end their employment and let's go look for some. But with new entrants into the market who are probably going to benefit significantly, otherwise they wouldn't be making such investments. I think that they have to take some significant amount of responsibility for paying for retraining for those individuals.
I think we have to start thinking about the way in which we accept bids and the way in which we give work and we allow. So as reference said, if a company's coming in making a significant bid for a piece of work, then there must be some kind of strings attached to that in terms of how they train people, what sort of input they're going to have to that. Also things such as which we're currently trying to work through with the Scottish Government, should there be high areas of redundancies across an area, then the company who are coming in to create work must look at the people who've been made redundant from those previous areas to try and make sure that there's a skills match. And the skills matching is going to be absolutely critical. We're working with Forth Valley College just now to try and make sure that people are getting potentially made redundant in Grangemouth are going to be given skills that are transferable, that they can go and do other work within the area until something new comes online. So it's going to be vital. The part which I think Robert had mentioned, or Ian had mentioned, is the increasing age of the workforce and what are we doing with apprentices. And unfortunately, I think the apprentice scheme needs to be really, really looked at in terms of making sure that it's fit for purpose, and that people are given, the young people coming through the future, given proper apprenticeships with proper training. And I just think that we need to start being, more critical, looking at, one, we are giving procurement policies out and what we're doing inside procurement, both at UK and Scottish Government levels, to ensure that there is a proper, fair and social and economic system inside those procurement policies, which means when companies have been awarded or given help by the UK or the Scottish Government to fund such issues, that they're actually looking at the local economy, they're looking at the local people, and they're making sure that there's skills bases there to do that job, and people are not just thrown in the scrap heap because they've worked as a scaffolder offshore, they've worked as a technician offshore. There must be a way that we can bring them over into renewable jobs. But I'll go back to my main point again. If you invest and you look at bringing a manufacturing base back to Scotland, you do not need a whole lot of retraining for a lot of these people that are currently in these jobs.
We went to see Babcock, and there was a lot of conversation about the apprentice system with Forth Valley, which was, really impressive. Yeah. I was absolutely blown away by that. But when you look at the demands of the renewable world, they're quite engineering based, quite computer based, mathematical based. Do you think we've got the right educational resource in order to satisfy the demands of this sector?
So a lot of the stuff that's going to be coming online in terms of renewables is very high level. And I always make this comparison that until the technologies and the knowledge starts to become more online, it starts to become cheaper, those things are going to be too expensive for a lot of companies to invest in. A lot of people will say, well, do you know what, if I invest, that's going to cost me $5 billion just now, but if I wait 10 years or 15 years, it's going to come down in price. That's just the way technology works, if you think about it in that form. So the theory and what you're talking about, those sort of technical synergy areas of expertise that are needed are still there. But when we come to the building of these green and renewable energies, there's still going to need to be electricians, there's still going to need to be construction workers, there's still going to need to be the whole range of what we would say things that drive the economy. I mean, I'll give you an example of Highland Council, who are obviously with the Cromarty Firth, are trying to bring people from all over Scotland to start working in the Inverness and Highlands area because they believe that they're calling that like a reverse Highland clearances type of thing, where they're trying to bring everything into the Highlands, and they believe that because they're going to be generating work, that they'll be able to create new apprenticeships, they'll be able to bring people over from the Aberdeen area and all that kind of stuff. So they're looking at a whole range of different skills packages there, which is great for them. But then that creates a shortage in skills elsewhere as well, and that's where the retraining and the skills package needs to be looked at right across the country. There is some excellent work being done, but it's been done in isolation, and it probably needs a bit more of a central push and a central steer in terms of how we bring, like a national skills service together, or a national skills database, or a national skills matching matrix. You can put, you put in your skills and it would give you an available job for somewhere to go. But on some of your points earlier on, just in the education system, if you were to go, and I've got experience of this, if you've got a young kid and you go to their teacher and say to them, what skills, what will I tell my son to study or my daughter to study to be in the green industry, and they'll say, I don't know. So we're not at that, and this is why the pacing of just transition is so important. If we rush it too far ahead, as I spoke about the tipping point in jobs, you're going to have this gap here where, investors just won't. They're going to look at it and say, well, Scotland's not really a good place to invest, or UK is not a good place to invest at this point in time, because we don't have that package of overall skills. So until we get that up and running and put things and implement those areas, we could be getting left behind. And I think that's why a lot of options that people are looking at is to try and import and not to take a grip of it and start manufacturing again in the UK.
Just briefly, I think that's points very well made by Derek. You mentioned Babcock, for example, the likes of SSE, Scottish Power, Ørsted. These companies tend to have a real stake in their local communities, in society. And of course, they're profit-making organisations, and we'll have long lists of complaints and disagreements we have with them. But it's clear that those organisations really care about what the industry is going to look like 20 years from now. And that's some of the reasons why they have these training programs, and some of the companies I just mentioned there investing in training centres, really positive. There is a concern in the renewable sector that we have different types of companies who, for example, will do everything in their power to avoid collective bargaining. So you'll have an engineer who will go from transmission to distribution, and then we'll go across to work for a renewables company. No access to, for example, collective bargaining. And I know as a trade union official, naturally I'll be advocating for collective bargaining. But not having collective bargaining in place is a real indicator of, in my view, certainly of what kind of long-term approach an organisation is going to have. So, and I'm talking about junior engineers not having access to collective bargaining, which is not acceptable. So I think there's a real concern. Obviously, new startup organisations are brilliant, and small, nimble investors in renewables, that can all be very positive. But I do think that we have very large companies who long list of criticisms of, no doubt about it, but actually do have a stake in the future of the Scotland energy industry, and I think they should be listened to. And I think as they invest in their own existing staff, I think they have to be part of the solution and the changeover. Whereas it will be tempting to say, look at this, fancy new organisation who wants to spend billions. I think we have to ensure that we are appropriately valuing what the existing suppliers are doing and the existing companies do.
I think we've sort of been here before. I touched on this earlier when speaking to some of our members who'd been through this transition before from the steel, from the coal, and that's the worry where generations were lost then because we didn't have plans in place for retraining workforces, make sure they can transition into new. They heard all this before. Oil and gas then was the new way forward when we were closing down the coal mines. Now we're getting told that it's a green energy is the new way forward, and we're closing down drilling. We're not licensing for drilling. We're not putting out. We're closing down wells, and we're leaving these people in the scrap heap. We need to make sure there's plans in place, and we've all got an important part in that. And as my colleague from Prospect said there, too many times are we dealing with companies that are taking people in that will not deal with trade unions, will not speak to us. So we're getting the door closed in our face.
Just a really brief supplementation on that. I think Robert makes was really brief supplementation on that is not just because we're trade unions and we want members, but actually where there is recognised workplaces, those workplaces have proven to be safer, and these are safety critical industries, and there's very well publicised horrific accidents over the years, and that's really an issue as well. Again, look, we will obviously advocate for collective bargaining, of course we will, but there's a really important, and I do think it speaks to their community concern and their social responsibility if they're just against collective bargaining. Sorry.
Just to take up Robert's point there, the committee is going to be having a look at industrial communities and the effect of previous transitions so that we can highlight what lessons need to be learned going forward. So that's something you might want to watch out for. Could I ask though, the UK Government Office for Clean Energy Jobs and Great British Energy, what role do they play in retraining North Sea workers to allow them to move into other industries, particularly renewables?
Yeah, I think they can play a crucial role. Previously the LGA, now the North Sea Transition Authority, again do incredibly good work. But I think the way that it's been mooted that GB Energy will come in, I think there's potentially real positives there. I think it's a real opportunity to have a real focus on the national benefit of these investments. I think it's going to be a good way to ideally regulate the investment and ensure that it attracts appropriate investment, but far more importantly, that investment is allocated appropriately and there's enough community benefit and worker benefit. again, with Great British Energy, and look, I know it's in its infancy, and I know there's a lot of expectation from it. I would underline that I think it's really important that there is a worker voice fundamentally around the table, obviously at chair level, which I think, to be fair, I think is loud and clear, but on decision making as well, to make sure there is a worker voice through that, because that is a community voice, and I think that's going to be really important to GB Energy. But broadly speaking, and I think it appears to be a good way of ensuring that government resources are going to be allocated appropriately and that investment is going to be directed appropriately. I think it's important that it doesn't take a hands-off approach. I think it has to have significant expertise. I think there is a risk, though, with the likes of when setting up a new agency like this, it's going to need to attract very well-rounded, very knowledgeable and very experienced experts. If those experts perhaps at the moment work for large oil companies, there might be geologists, there might have various different skills, and I think it is important that an organisation like that will be nimble enough to make sure it can attract the best subject matter experts. I think that can sometimes be a challenge when it's an agency, but I think that's going to be really important. But broadly speaking, we welcome its introduction.
So in terms of GB Energy, I think we're still waiting to see what its actual direction of travel is going to look like. Ian referenced a number of good points of what it can achieve. Until we see the detail of that, I mean, it was launched with a fanfare. It was used as a lot of things with a pre-general election, and I think the admittance, I think it was a bit of a disappointment across the board when the admittance of the chairman that nothing was going to be happening over the next couple of years until they got things in play. I think that was, I think we would all hope that there'd been an accelerated piece of work to try and bring the investment in that was needed. So for Unite, it's a wait and see on GB Energy. We will of course engage with it where we can, and particularly, I just don't want it to be, I don't think it should be sold as some kind of saviour to the oil and gas industries, I think is what it's been portrayed in some areas, because I don't think, I know the colleague from Aberdeen's not here anymore, but I don't think it's going to come in and create the amount of jobs in Aberdeen to replace the amount of jobs that are potentially going to go in oil and gas. And I just don't want it to be seen as some kind of saviour to the oil and gas industry in the UK energy supply chain, because until we see, as rightly said, how it's going to deal with potential investors, what kind of regulatory powers it's going to have, is it going to, can we bring in fair work principles into every single, investment that comes in. All those things we would, happily sit down and discuss with those officials in GB Energy. But at this stage, for us, it's a wait and see if it can deliver.
Okay, just a wee reminder that I'm specifically asking about retraining workers in this regard. Okay. Robert?
I think I sort of touched on it earlier that there was 8.3 billion pledged for it. That's already been reduced significantly. So, I mean, there is a danger. I mean, less than a year then since it was the fanfare of this, it's not looking promising. Of course, we'll engage with it. We'll support it. We want it to work. We want it to create clean jobs. We want this going forward. We want the training, the transition coming over. But at this moment in time, it's just not looking promising.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to a slightly different subject now, but one that you've all mentioned. So I would like to ask, which parts of the supply chain do you think are going to be badly affected and potentially have job losses as we move on?
So clearly there's those in the logistics side and the support services that work offshore. So for every person that works offshore, I believe that 2 people support that onshore, and you've obviously got the massive headquarters of all the major, oil capital of Europe, Aberdeen. You've got that, but you've also got those areas around that. You've got St Fergus, you've got Peterhead, you've got a whole range of different areas where potentially people's jobs will be lost. You've also got the issue around, tanker drivers, delivery drivers, movement of parts. People coming off. So there's a whole range of different industries that get looked into. There's also areas in the offshore industry which seem to get quite ignored. We've got a high amount of caterers offshore, so people who do cleaning, who cater, who make food, who medics, etc. So when those oil rigs go, those skills need to be transferred over as well. So there's a whole range of different areas, but for us it's the logistics side of it in terms of what's happening in Aberdeen. If you look at the size of the buildings up there, Shell in particular, and BP buildings, so those will potentially go in terms of support there. But it's the building works, it's the fabric maintenance, it's a whole range of building supplies, of building and construction and manufacturing that go into pushing stuff offshore. In terms of other wider areas, and I know I keep referencing Grangemouth, but you will see, as oil and stuff comes in there and gets transported out as well, if that starts to cease, then where do these transport workers go as well? So there's a whole range of other things that need to be involved in it. I think the big headline news is always going to be about the oil and gas workers and those people who work on those offshore installations, but there's a whole range of support behind those things to make that actually happen. And I think ballpark estimates is 210,000 people in the supply chain in Scotland. That could have a devastating impact if those jobs are not brought back into whatever the renewables are going to be.
Is there a place for the UK government in encouraging greater investment in the domestic supply chain?
The
answer is yes.
Look, there absolutely is, but it's not just trade union calls for more cash as well. I think there absolutely is, and I think it will benefit everybody across the board. There is elements of the existing supply chains that probably have been allowed over decades. There's elements of it that have been allowed to. We've allowed ourselves just to allow not be based in Britain. G&B speak very well on that. But I think there's a huge benefit to it in general. As we know, there's knock-on benefits in terms of industry. But given the just transition that we're facing, I think it's doubly, triply more important because of the potential consequences and job losses that we face. It's generally speaking, I think it's good practice to ensure that our supply chain benefits local economies and benefits the British economy. But I think that is far more important. If I could say, at the moment, maybe some people would see, wouldn't it be nice if we built that infrastructure here? Wouldn't it be nice if the supply chain was here? But not to worry, we have to bring it in. Now, as we move into renewables being the focus and to just transition, it's not a nice to have. It's absolutely essential that infrastructure is and those supply chains are benefiting the British economy.
I think my two colleagues have covered it pretty well. I mean, it's hard to put an exact figure on it, but as Derek from Unite was saying, you've got just looking at all the headquarters that are based in Aberdeen, all the office staff that are in there, then you've got catering, cleaning, people to maintain those buildings, the contractors to maintain those, but every one of them would be impacted should this sector go. So it's hard to put an exact figure on it. Like Derek said, the ballpark run about 210,000. I wouldn't be surprised if that is the close to that figure, the jobs that could be impacted.
Thank you. Christine.
Thank you very much. You've mentioned community a few times, particularly yourself, Ian. But I'd like to ask all of you, how might community-owned energy and community benefits play a role in a just transition for workers and communities?
I'll be start off. Look. I think it's about having a stake in the change, and I think that will be all important. We mentioned communication earlier on. I think when people feel that they have a stake in that, community ownership helps that massively. We need to be careful, obviously, that not to benefit a certain group of people because they're geographically lucky to live next to a wind farm, etc., etc. But I do think community ownership is something that should be looked at, and where that's feasible, that should be engaged. I think community benefit again is absolutely essential, and I think it will be right to ensure that any investment comes in has a minimum amount of community benefit. I do think it's important that it's not something that's later in the process as a box-ticking exercise. I think it has to be important that the community are involved from early on. We see the existing companies that have a real stake in Scottish society flourishing. We see them engaging well with communities as part of the T3 transmission plan. We see companies, for example, SSE are building houses locally for people, and there's going to be a massive legacy around that. That's really positive. I do though think that it has to be something that is not even seen as or felt as a tick box at the end of a process. That community are brought in early and they're part of the decision making. And again, community ownership, I think, can be really positive. There's models that we've seen around the world where it works well, but as an absolute minimum, I think there has to be very significant community benefit. What I would say, just on that, is one way of guaranteeing community benefit is ensuring that people in those communities have good, sustainable jobs with collective bargaining. And that's often, the community centre, of course that's important. Good school, good facilities, AstroTurf pitches, that's all incredibly beneficial. But actually, good, sustainable jobs that people can look at and think, I can reliably have an income for the next decade to support my family. That's a massive community benefit that we would see.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Ian on those points. It has to be community. It has to be based around the jobs that can be brought to that community, and it has to be that circle of apprenticeships and all that kind of stuff that goes in. And I think, from our point of view, we've been calling for this around Grangemouth, where we are, looking to try and, make sure there's like a joint, a just transition, Grangemouth board where community sits in that right from the beginning. Everybody's discussing that, and that could probably be replicated around some of the major cities that are facing those elements in towns. But there are some good models out there where people are, building sustainable housing. There's things going on that they're bringing, proper, good wealth opportunities into the community. But again, it's a bit piecemeal at this point in time. It's probably going to need a bit more of a focus when it comes to some of those areas. But I just think that the economic impact assessment that's going to need across the UK cities around what's going to happen has to get done very, very quickly. I will reference it again, but when we got the PricewaterhouseCoopers economic impact assessment, quite clearly shows that redundancy situation at Grangemouth is going to have a £403 million deficit yearly to that local economy. And that's going to impact the community. It's going to impact every single shop and every single restaurant, and that's a community which already has, a higher unemployment rate, believe it or not, than most areas, and also has a higher poverty rate than most areas. And that just shows you in some of those more rural areas that may have a foot in the door of the oil and gas industry just now, when that goes without jobs that are going to pay the same, then I think you're looking at an increase in poverty levels right across some areas of the country.
If I can just pick up on the point that was made about it looking quite piecemeal at the moment. I can't remember which one. Was it yourself, Derek, or was it you that said?
Yeah.
It's looking a bit patchy. So do you think that Great British Energy has a role to play in community-owned energy and benefits? And if so, what do you think that role should be?
Well, hopefully it will. I'll reiterate my points at the beginning that, until we are involved in those discussions, seeing the terms of references, understanding what its role is in terms of, I'm still a bit, still a lack of detail in terms of what everybody understands its general role, but when you start breaking that down into its component parts, what are we actually expecting it to do inside there? Will it have the powers to do it as well? So yeah, we would hope that would be a role for GB Energy, but again, we will try and influence that when we have those discussions with appropriate people to make sure that happens. But something that being raised to appropriate channels through this committee chair would probably be helpful. That would be something that would be welcome.
I think we're seeing it just now. It's going through it now. The workers in communities in Grangemouth, and we've had it in Methil, they're not seeing it. They haven't seen a transition into good jobs. What they're seeing is redundancies from good unionised skilled jobs. That's what they're seeing just now, and we need to learn from that to protect our communities going forward. I touched on it earlier, the damage that was done decades ago, but not having a proper plan moving forward. So we really need to learn. I stayed just up from Ravenscraig I stayed there for many years now, and I've seen we've got good housing on the site of the old Ravensgrave. We've got a sports community centre. It's those sort of things where we can create jobs, create sustainable housing. That's what we need to learn and make sure when we're going through this green energy change that we need to make sure that communities are protected.
So
not left behind.
That the energy should have a role in
I think absolutely should have a role.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask how important you think the affordability energy bills is in delivering a just transition as well?
Yeah, well, just briefly, look, it's obviously incredibly important that consumers' energy bills are as low as possible, and it's obvious. We know that in the UK, energy bills are a lot higher than comparable countries and other countries. So I think the motivation to reduce energy bills is very well motivated. What I would say, the other side of it, look, we've gone through a phase of having an appallingly broken retail energy market. We've allowed companies to come into that retail market and go bankrupt after a few years, and have very wealthy executives and very wealthy shareholders, and then they've gone bust and moved on. To be fair, there's been real steps to mitigate that, and it's now perhaps a healthier market than it was. I think there's lots of things that you can do to ensure that energy bills are cheaper for people. Of course, it's a motivation. Of course, it's a motivation for our members. I do think, though, that there are particular challenges of the UK energy market, the way it's structured, that means that we probably are not going to be the cheapest in Europe or the cheapest by OECD comparators. It's probably not going to be achievable. What we would say, naturally, is the last thing we need is employers being put under so much pressure to reduce bills that pressure ends up on our members' desk and suppressing their salaries, or even encouraging employers to behave in a way that it's cut costs any way they can. But broadly speaking, of course, reduced energy bills is the right thing to do. We're in favour of reduced energy bills. Clearly, they are too high. I think much of that is because of the kind of structure of the markets. Some of it is just nuances to the GB system. But yeah, I think it's well motivated to bring them down, but would caveat that with workers are not. Workers certainly aren't paid multiples of anybody, any of the comparative organisations.
Thank you. And if I could just finally ask, what actions you think that the UK government could take to support the local communities that we've heard about today that are heavily reliant on oil and gas?
Well, I think they're going to need to look at investment in some areas. I think there's going to need to be an admittance that to do a just transition, it will require government support. I think that needs to be laid on the line. There will be investors coming in, but investors primarily will be looking for profit at the end of that. And we're not in a lot of these places. As I said earlier, the technologies and skill base is going to be so high that it might not be in their best interest as a commercial decision for them to come in. So, government needs to step in and start to look at how it can make regulatory changes. For instance, if you look at the issue of sustainable air fuel, which is going to be huge going forward, we firmly believe that the site at Grangemouth could be converted very, very quickly and a lot cheaper than building a new SAF plant. And of course, we welcome the 200 million that was given from the wealth. Well, it's not been given yet. It has to be matched, obviously, with investment. But areas like that, where there is a real productivity need and a real economic need for sustainable air fuel going forward into the future, then the government should be stepping forward and saying, well, we'll become an investor of first choice at this point in time. We will make the stake first to make sure that we can bring investors in. And I think there is a lot of investors who, people who want to be involved in capital projects, pension scheme people, etc., who are just looking at the regulatory issues across the UK and saying, well, it's not for us at this point in time. So we need to see the UK government making that first step at that point to say, yeah, if you come in with a plan for greener energies and creating jobs, we will help you do that. So I think the government has to be more bold in its approach to creating a just transition and recognising that it can and should match where it can, particularly for things like sustainable air fuel, which is potentially quite a high money maker for people, because it's going to be the only fuel that's going to be going forward. So areas like that, we believe that the government could step in and support industry, business and community and workers by becoming an investor when it's needed.
It's not just about money; it's also about regulatory.
So there's regulatory. So particularly on without being overly technical, sustainable air fuel requires a feedstock. And for it to be, we look at what HEFA, which is hydrofatted acids, which is basically, food waste and oils and stuff like that. But the regulatory barriers in the UK mean that you can't use it in the scale which has been used in other countries. Hence why you see areas like, Belgium's going to have 4 sustainable air fuel refineries. It doesn't have any oil. It doesn't have a pipeline that we do. So the regulatory barriers, if lifted, would, I think, ensure a quicker and more accelerated investment from companies. So on the back, I do believe Project Willow will be recommending an acceleration of some changes to particularly around HEFA, which would allow a feedstock to be created, which would allow sustainable air fuel to be done. But the targets for that are quite significant over the years that are due to come in. So there's areas like that, carbon capture as well, where we just need to, and I will reiterate again that we're extremely disappointed that Grangemouth, St Fergus and others were not considered for the project ACON funding that was just announced at the last budget. We're hopeful that'll come in tranche 2. But so there are areas that the UK government could invest in Scotland and be that investor first choice, first point of contact, and really, help communities, industries, workers build sustainable workplaces.
But on carbon capture, recently wrote to the Cabinet Secretary to underline real concern about that lack of focus on the possibilities around carbon capture in Peterhead. We think it's part of it. But on the question of what the UK government can do, in the sense where that it's a broad question, I do think that the UK government can do more to engage organisations like Just Transition organisations, and I think it's not been without its criticism and controversies and maybe a lot of expectation around it, but the Just Transition Commission in Scotland that has done significant work, and I think broadly speaking has been welcome. Obviously, when you create something like that, it can be a place where people can throw all their problems and then complain that they're not resolved, but it has encouraged a lot of local community engagement, and I think the UK government should embrace that type of approach more. Of Just Transition Commission, UK-wide, in some sort of way. I think that would be very beneficial.
Thank you. Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Chair. I wish to turn now specifically to Grangemouth. On the 5th of February of this year, redundancy letters were issued to Grangemouth workers. At least 435 staff expected to lose their jobs. Trade unions described this as an act of industrial vandalism. Before I ask you about the government's role, I want to ask you first of all about the owner's role in this. So it's a question to all of you. To what extent did the owners have an exit plan, Petroineos have an exit plan in place before it announced that Grangemouth's oil refinery would close?
So our understanding was that ministers in the Scottish Government had been in discussions with Petroineos around a possible closure or repurposing of the site into an import terminal for at least 2 years before that was done. We got that information through a Freedom of Information request, and it was not public knowledge. So Petroineos have clearly stated that it's not a viable commercial entity for them, that it's a profit, it's a loss-making company. We have directly challenged that. I presented a paper to a similar committee in the Scottish Government which shows the profit and losses of that company, and apart from a period in time where they made an adjustment, which they're allowed to do, that is a viable trading company, and it is profit making. It hadn't been profit making because an asset called the hydrocracker had been switched off, and it was then fixed. But then it was mothballed for technical reasons, and ever since then it was never switched back on, and it had continued to lose money. So we would argue that it is not a loss-making venture. it required capital expenditure to be invested in it, as all projects do. But this has been, in our belief, a long-term strategy by Petro-Ineos to become an import company because it's cheaper for them. And they don't want to maintain the capital asset expenditure which is required at the current refinery. And it's a joint venture between Petro-Ineos and PetroChina. And PetroChina is looking to become the biggest exporter of sustainable aviation fuel in the coming 5 to 10 years. And that will then, if we do not get our act together on sustainable aviation fuel in this country, we will then be importing all that fuel from PetroChina and Petro-Ineos. So for them, it's a clear business decision for them to go down that route because that's where they're going to make more of their profits. We've also seen the fact that the UK government has underwritten a €700 million loan for Ineos to build a plant at Antwerp in Belgium to do similar work, which they never intervened until recently in Grangemouth to do something similar. So Petro-Ineos does, of course, has to take the shoulder of blame in terms of closing the refinery for its own, what we believe to be spurious profit-making and security issues. But on top of that, for it to be closed in the manner potentially that it has done when there's options on the table, and for us to be removing the very fabric of manufacturing and the possibility of creating our own sustainable air fuel while we allow it to be imported from a potentially hostile country in this global economic field that we're in, it's just absolute madness. And we put forward a plan, and hopefully it is replicated slightly in the Project Willow announcement, where we could do sustainable air fuel at Grangemouth for a fraction of the cost of building a new sustainable air fuel plant, which they're looking at doing later on. But this is all going to be coming down to the fact that the assets at Grangemouth are still viable in our belief, but the company is just going to shut the site down. So it is a hellish situation for the people, the workers and the community, and we welcome some of the stuff that's going to be in Project Willow, but the knock-on effects in this right across that area are going to be absolutely devastating. But we have had some good support from Scottish Government and UK officials and training and skills. But
I'll ask you about government in a moment. I'll just ask you to focus on the company at this stage.
Okay. So the company have moved to this, despite I think the language that's been used by the First Minister in Scotland and by Michael Shanks and Ian Murray is they've not been able to persuade the company to reverse its decision. And I question the role of government then, if we can't interject when there's a massive black hole that's going to be created across jobs and the economy. So the company, we do not accept the company was loss-making. We do not accept the fact that the assets were as bad as what they maintained it to be, and we believe it's been almost a controlled timeline by them to shut it, to become an import terminal, on the basis that their joint venture partners will be the biggest exporter of sustainable air fuel, and we'll be importing it.
Yeah, just briefly, Derek and Robert will have more local knowledge on that area. But look, there's a good way and a bad way of making closures and having to make changes. Now, we would argue that actually there is real potential in that site, as Derek has mentioned, green aviation fuel or sustainable aviation fuel, and also the use of carbon capture. We think more focus can be put on that. So the rationale for its closure, we don't think has been made, and I think every effort needs to be made in that. But I'll give an example that our three unions were involved in, along with Unison, with a large employer in Scotland, with Scottish Power, when they closed the Long Annet power station. Devastating for people involved, but they, to be fair, and we'll all have long criticisms about the employer, etc., but that was done in a very, very orderly way. Over a period of about 8 years, there was a huge amount of notice. People could really rely on either being retrained by that employer, by being reallocated by that employer, or taking an appropriate redundancy package. There was no question of them waiting for an announcement in the news or waiting for an announcement by a politician. They knew that their unions were being properly consulted all the way through that process. So there's a good way to make these closures, and then there's other ways. I don't want to give any criticism to this employer because I'm just not close enough to it, but I would encourage them to ensure that the staff have clarity as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, Derek's got more insight in this than myself, but I mean, Petro-Ineos if I remember when they had their evidence session at the Scottish Parliament, laid the blame squarely at the foot of the UK and Scottish Government for their changes. They were claiming the approach to the Scottish Government and UK Government 5 years ago, with the trouble that their business was in, said they didn't get a move on, and Derek's challenged that with the figures they claimed they were losing. And I mean, what the facts are, that they've abandoned almost 3,000 jobs across Scotland. That's what they've done. They've thrown people to the scrap heap. 500 of those are their own employees. They've simply thrown them on the scrap heap without a second thought for these people's futures. And the community of Grangemouth, like we touched on earlier, the poverty that's already in that area is just now it's significantly going to increase with the loss of these jobs.
Thank you. On from that point you made, Robert, some would suggest that these plans were known by both the UK and the Scottish Government for almost a decade, but at least for 5 years prior to the announcement. How well did the previous UK Government and the Scottish Government handle the decision to close the refinery?
I mean, again, when you say someone, the only people I've seen saying it was Petro and us themselves, unless when Derek's had more insight into it, whether he could answer that, what he would know that this both Scottish and UK government's involvement was in the closure of these sites.
So, as I said earlier on, it came out the blue to us at the time, but further, FOI requests showed that I think there was discussions taking place with the company and Scottish government officials around potential issues that they had across the areas. I do not know of any previous...
How long ago was that?
Our information says it was 2 years ago.
2 years ago?
2 years ago, yep.
The owners and the Scottish Government discussed the closure?
Yes. Or potential closure. But I don't know anything about any discussions that were held at UK and level around this issue. As I said, it came out the blue. The handling of it, I think, has been left a lot to be desired by both the UK and Scottish Government. Until I think we started to really pressure them, I don't think there would have been very much movement, and I still think the handling of it has been significantly more proactive by the Scottish Government than it has been by the UK Government. And we sat in a room with Ed Miliband, who just basically shrugged his shoulders and says there's nothing we can do, and that was a massive disappointment to the workers and ourselves that a UK Government newly elected had made, let's be honest, a whole raft of promises to that workforce around saving Grangemouth and making sure it was going to be invested in, shrugged their shoulders at the thought of that. And it's only been through, I believe, the pressure of our campaign and work that we've managed to get and secure a lot of the stuff that's there. But yeah, so I think there was more proactiveness from the Scottish Government, less so from the UK Government, but I think both have to show a bit of failure in how this has been allowed to happen. And it does come back to some of the points, Chair, that we were making earlier on about regulatory processes, about commitment and procurement processes, that when we are, given, or yourselves are authorising big projects with multinational companies, that you're looking at who those companies are and what their records are, and making sure that you have an intervention process. And I hate it when people tell me, well, this is just business and this is how capital works. Well, that is how capital works, but what's the role of government in that then? When a company can just pull the plug on 450 direct jobs, 2,822 in the supply chain, 403 million to the economy, and just do it like that, and we can't intervene. I was actually saying that the UK and Scottish Government have got no power to intervene in that area, and that has probably been the most disappointment to Douglas in terms of the sort of UK and government's responses. We are moving forward. Obviously, we have got the commitment of money from the Wealth Fund. But again, the hooray and fanfare that was launched with, when you actually dig into how many steps you need to go through to get money out the Wealth Fund, does not fill me with confidence that money is going to be readily available. But hopefully, if we can match some of the funding that's required for Project Willow with parts of that National Wealth Fund money, then maybe it's a step forward.
Yeah, look, Project Willow was published 15 minutes before this, so we had a chance to digest this. So I won't comment.
I think one of my colleagues may ask you about Project Willow after this question, but just stick to my original question about the previous UK Government and the Scottish Government's handling of the decision.
So what I'll say is I wasn't party to that, so I'm commenting on speculation about comments that may be had. So no information on that, so I'd rather not comment.
Okay, well, can I ask you then specifically to comment on the current government's announcement? Did you regard it as a welcome announcement in relation to the support that's there for those facing imminent redundancy?
Yeah, so I think Project Willow just came out 15 minutes before this, and I know some colleagues are very much closer to it, maybe had some advanced briefings on it. As an initial response, I think a lot of it still needs to be tied down. I think we're watching it very closely, and I think we'll have a position on that in the next couple of days. I think, to be fair, I think the timing hasn't been great on that. Derek mentioned the National Wealth Fund, and I think that there has to be a position for that, and I think GB Energy, when that's active, you would imagine that's going to be allocating some of the National Wealth Fund. You would hope it would have oversight on that. But just to underline, this is going to potentially devastate an area. This is an organisation who makes hundreds of millions of pounds per year. This is affordable for them to keep it going. And I think the UK government and Scottish government should do everything possible to keep these jobs in place and to seek to, if need be, to repurpose that site to make sure everybody has been guaranteed a job. I don't think enough has been done, but let's assess what's in Project Willow and let's assess what the outputs are.
I know it's early days and the suggestion is perhaps that Project Willow could deliver 800 jobs, but I think the figure they're giving us is by the year 2040, which is 15 years from now. I mean, do any of you feel as if somehow this is 10 years too late?
Well, absolutely, and I think we've been saying this about Project Willow. It was heralded at the beginning when the announcement was made, and £1.5 million went in to this project. The project was effectively a secret document between Petroineos and EY. We had to give a freedom of information request to see the terms of reference of that project, and we were refused it because of a confidential agreement, despite assurances that we would have been involved. And this is the point about the just transition. We may see an accelerated move from areas inside Project Willow, but accelerated view still requires planning, boots on the ground, construction, a whole range of things. What we have here is a site at Grangemouth that's got all the assets needed, a hydrocracker, a hydrotreater, it's got a skilled workforce it's got there, which could be converted very easily into a sustainable airfield plant over the 1 to 3 years without losing any jobs. In fact, we could put on jobs because we could build a HEFA processing plant there to coincide it. It's already been done in America, where the site was transformed over a year from an oil refinery to a sustainable aviation fuel plant. It was done for not a fraction of the cost, but it's cheaper to convert an existing refinery to do sustainable air fuel and other things, rather than build a new build. It's all been cleared. The Scottish Enterprise have said that, the UK government has said it's cheaper to do it this way. What it does require is some investment. And the thing about this is, as well, is that sustainable air fuel is not 100% sustainable at this point in time. It's a blended process. So you combine oil with different elements to make it biofuel, but this is gradually going to increase and go up. So what you're doing is you can continue to refine oil at Grangemouth into petrol. You can continue to distribute it across the North East England, Scotland. You could continue to distribute it to the airports in Scotland, who are all crying out for Grangemouth to be kept open while you transfer it over to keep it going into sustainable air fuel as the technology increases and you keep the jobs going. We presented that plan to the UK government, we presented it to Ed Miliband, I presented it to John Swinney alongside their General Secretary, and it is in Project Willow, sustainable air fuel there. But what's happening just now, without the immediate intervention on this, what's going to happen is that these jobs are going to go. The skill base is going to disappear, the assets will be demolished by Petroineos, and then the UK government will have to look at building a sustainable air fuel plant in the future when it's one sitting there, right there, ready to go with existing skill base. It's absolute madness for this UK government, the Scottish government, not to intervene at such a critical time when sustainable air fuel is going to be the future and airports are crying out for it. But yeah, what we're going to do is allow the company to shut up shop and start importing our petrol. So petrol for Scotland, petrol for Ireland, petrol for the North East England will all come in from boats, and then that will then be put onto trucks. I'll be transported around the country. Now, I'm not sure what that does for your greenhouse gases emissions, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to be the same as what's there. So there is a real choice here that there's still time for us to step in, to pause the closure of the refinery to assess the assets to see how much it would cost, and then look at securing that site as a sustainable airfield site. That's the route we should be going down if we want a just transition. We shouldn't be shutting, losing jobs, devastating the economy, and then coming back 5 years' time after we've become an import terminal for another country on sustainable airfuel.
Robert, the workers facing imminent redundancy, your members, what support has been announced so far? Is it enough?
The majority of our members, they're mostly the subcontractors, so we don't know how many are actually directly impacted by this, because they move around a lot from job to job. The core workers is represented by Unite. But just touching on what Derek said about Project Willow, this should have happened years ago. This is long overdue. I mean, it's going to take decades to get to where we need to be, and in the meantime, what we're watching just now is hundreds of skilled jobs disappearing. In Scotland, an oil-producing nation is not refining its own oil. I think Derek said it perfectly, it's madness.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. I have two supplementaries, Kirstine and then Angus.
Yeah, no, I do appreciate the major impact in the local community, particularly as an MP that represents a neighbouring constituency, and obviously has been of great concern. So with regard to the job losses, and I appreciate the aspect around jobs and skills, not just for the people at present but for people in the future. But I wonder if you could tell me how many people at the moment are staring unemployment in the face, and if you have any idea of how many people have secured jobs elsewhere and how many have decided that they're going to retire, because it is an ageing workforce. I think that was touched upon already, so I really personally want to get an understanding of how many people currently have no prospects of getting another job.
Yeah. So the redundancy notices that have been referenced have been issued, and those will go over a staged approach as they start to decommission and demolish and switch off some of the sites. So there's been a number of job fairs and things like that where people have went along, and we've been, Forth Valley College have been very, very good in terms of trying to help us build up a skills database. But there's an economic discrepancy in some of this. So for instance, I asked, so the college said to me, if one of your members wants to train to be a teacher, right, we will help them get those skills to become a teacher. So that's maybe somebody who's been in employment for 20, 30 years is looking for a career change. It's actually not as much of an ageing workforce as what you would think. So I then asked the college, right, so you're going to train this person as a teacher. How many teaching vacancies are there in that area? And there aren't any teaching vacancies. Do you see what I mean? So we can, by telling people there's job opportunities for them to go to, but there's no jobs for them in the field that they're doing. So there's that element of it that's the sort of the discrepancy that hasn't been looked at. As I understand it, there is a couple of people have already upsticked and left, but the majority of people are still waiting to see, rightly so in our view, rightly to see, well, so the question that the workers say to me every time I meet them is, well, what does this mean for me now? What does 200 million mean for the UK government? They keep telling me this is to save Grangemouth. Is it to save the refinery? Is it to do something else? What does Project Willow mean for me? What does this money mean for me? What does this announcement mean for me? And this is the problem, is that it's all in the ether just now, because the money's not actually going directly into the workers. So sorry, just to go back to your point, I think that we will be seeing a base of people who will not get employment in the same field that they were working on. And of course we secured through negotiating an 18-month redundancy package. The UK government has stated in numerous press releases that it is guaranteeing 18 months money for people. So I would ask this committee, that was something we negotiated. I would like to know if they're going to be guaranteeing that 18 months to every other person who's made redundant, because I can tell you now, on the back of this refinery announcement, because of the shared services across the other sites at EOS, that we've already started moving into redundancy negotiations with the chemicals plant. And there's also just been told that there's been an HR1 submitted for 140 people in Altrad who do the construction work. So the refinery was always the tip of the iceberg because of the impact it was going to have. So again, we would ask whether this negotiated thing that we done as a union is what's been heralded as theirs by the UK government, and if not, will they be supplying people with those 18 months? So
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I do appreciate the impact on the supply chain, but my specific question is I want to know how many people at this point in time, haven't secured any other jobs, haven't decided that they're going to retire, and actually are fearful that we are going to be unemployed, because I think there have been reports in the media that a lot of people have moved to, for example, SSE or Scottish Power. So, I think I really want clarity, because I'd like to know how many people are really worried and concerned about their future at the moment.
So the SSE have opened their doors. In effect, there's other companies have said that we are willing to take people on. But so it's great that we're having discussions with these. Let's be absolutely clear: not one person has left the refinery yet to take up new employment. Do you know? Because unless they've left off their own back. But if they've left off their own back, they don't get their redundancy terms. That's just part and parcel of the way things are negotiated. But it's a staged redundancy because they still need the workforce there to produce the work that they're doing in the plant. So nobody has actually left who's under threat of redundancy or accepted redundancy to find a new job. What we have done is secure job fairs. We put them in contact with other areas. They're obviously looking for people to come. But, I hope people take this as how I mean it. It's very, very difficult for somebody who's worked there for 15 years or somebody who's worked there for 10 years who has a young family and a mortgage in Grangemouth to say to them, by the way, here's a job for you over here, up sticks and move, and by the way, it's £30,000 less than what you were earning before, because it doesn't work like that. And just remember as well, there's a whole range of other companies have shut down in Grangemouth over the past 5 years. We are concentrating, of course, on the oil refinery, but there's been Fujitsu closed, a whole range of other areas have all closed across Grangemouth, and the money, the £100 million through the growth fund, which of course that was wasn't new money, it was 20 million, that was new money. They're talking about that's going to help do up the city centre or the town centre of Grangemouth. So it's all fine and well doing up a town centre, but if there's nobody there to walk through it, the money should be put elsewhere. So nobody has left yet, because the redundancy terms won't allow them to do that. But our understanding is that they've been to job fairs. So the job fairs had the NHS there, had the DWP, had a whole range of what you would call alternative careers, ones that are not within those people's what you would call their genuine skill bases, and that's where the Forth Valley College comes in. But they are looking. There's a number of good things getting done. I mean, don't get us wrong, but at the end of this. So you've got the hometown workers, those from Falkirk, Grangemouth area, who are potentially losing their job. Then you've got probably where Roberts people come in more, the contractors who come and live in Grangemouth on a seasonal or on a turnaround when the maintenance is required, who take up and who put their money into the hotels, and they put their money into the restaurants, they put their money into the pubs, and etc. etc. Those people will start to disappear as that refinery goes down, and that's where the economic impact of what's happening in Grangemouth comes through, because you can go and you can speak to any shopkeeper in Grangemouth, which we have done, and every single person will tell you there that they are fearful for their future.
We have another supplementary from Angus.
Derek, you talked about the aviation fuel coming from China. Yeah. Is that a fact?
Well, so if we do not have our own sustainable air fuel processing plant, it will be imported into this country, and the import terminal for Scotland is going to be the one run by Petroineos, and their joint venture partner is PetroChina. So if the country needs sustainable air fuel and we're not doing it here, they're going to import it. And if Petroineos is the supplier, it will come from PetroChina.
Elaine.
Well, on to Project Willow. What is your response to the Project Willow conclusions that have emerged in the media?
So obviously the report just came out today. We've been in discussions around some of this. As I indicated earlier on, we would have liked a lot more interaction between the companies, EY and the trade unions, but we were not given as much access in terms of how we would like. So there is 9 projects that have been announced, which range from a number of costs, the capital expenditure on a number of them range from I think 20 million up to 4 billion in terms of the projects. So when I met with Scottish Government ministers last week, I was very clear to them that, we do welcome stuff that's going to, protect for the future, but there is no timescales in these plans and Project Willow. It doesn't tell us how long from start to finish it would take. It doesn't tell us how many jobs will be required, both in terms of construction and then contracting and then mainstay staff to deliver the products. And it talks around, so some of the costs around those, will seem eye-watering in a lot of cases, $4 billion for this. And so until we see, so we've asked the Scottish Government ministers to get us more information on what the jobs look like. And of course, when I say Scottish Government ministers, I mean at a UK level as well. So the Scottish Government, as I understand it, are supportive of the Sustainable Air Fuel project that is within there. And the question on that is, there's a cost in here of $800 million, which it states for that, which probably is in line with what we think that conversion of Grangemouth would look like. So the question is now, can that be accelerated as a project? How quickly could it be done? And these are the questions I think have to be considered by the committee. We have an existing plant that refines oil. We have an existing workforce with the skills to refine the oil. We have the infrastructure and the assets that require the technological stuff to come online. What we have is a regulatory problem under HEFA. But at this point in time, it's not, as I said earlier, it's not going to be 100% sustainable aviation fuel. It will be a blended mix of petrol and other aspects that can be done through there. So what we are saying is, if you're going to accelerate anything in Project Willow, accelerate the sustainable air fuel plant and make sure, because by doing that, and by checking that the assets are viable, which we believe they are, the hydrocracker, the hydrotreat, all the things that are needed are on that place, check them out, and if they're a goer, then let's go with sustainable air fuel. Let's use the £200 million as the first point of investment from the UK Wealth Fund, and let's seek investors to come into that. And if that investor chooses to be Petroenios, if they reconsider that, then we'll work with them to make sure that we're implementing. If Petroenios don't want to do this, and Petroenios should sell up to the UK and Scottish governments as investors of first choice. And then we use a Project Willow board, or we use a Project Willow UK investment, GB Energy, whatever it needs to find investors for that area. And we become the exemplar of what a just transition looks like. We've seen a plan that currently does oil. We transition it over to do greener renewable energies over a period of time. We keep the workforce and potentially expand the workforce. It's a no-brainer. And in terms of costs, it's well within the limits of what a new sustainable air fuel plant would cost. If you want to wait 5 years to build a new plant at a more expensive cost, then that's what you do. But at the same point, you're going to need to accept that you're losing over 5 years £2.5 billion of the economy. You're potentially devastating a community when you've got an existing plant and an existing workforce that could easily transfer and convert into doing sustainable air fuel.
So it's suggested that the site will require $3.8 billion of investment over this decade, rising to $13 billion under the best case scenario. Yep. How realistic is that investment level? So
this is the point of what a lot of this discussion has been about, is securing the right investment in here. So we've always been clear that Project Willow was something for the future. It was always going to be delivered. The technologies that are required to make a lot of these things happen are still, by the way, 3 and 4 and 5 years away. And this is where the sustainable air fuel thing becomes interesting, because the government's own UK target, I believe. So the SAF mandate comes into effect from 2025, starting at 2% of jet fuel supplied in the UK must be SAF. So that's approximately 230,000 tonnes compared to 64 tonnes of SAF that should be produced in this country. So you can see that massive gap already. Therefore, an increase in our linear basis to 10% in 2030 and then 22% in 2040. You'll see that requires a significant increase in sustainable air fuel. That's the government's own mandated targets to make, and we don't have the capacity to do it. So all these things, so I believe the Scottish Government think that chemical plastics recycling and maybe hydrothermal can maybe come online quite quick, which may create, but they can't tell us how many jobs it could create. What I'm saying to you here is Project Willow has identified the sustainable air fuel as part and parcel of its project work. You've got an existing refinery, you've got an existing workforce, you've got existing assets, you've got the best infrastructure, which is actually highlighted in Project Willow. It tells you the road access, the train access, the air access is all built around Grangemouth. That's why it's been such a successful place. It's just, it makes no sense to me whatsoever that you wouldn't say as a government, right, let's just go for this SAF project. It saves Grangemouth, it saves the refinery, it gets us on track to meet our mandates for our own SAF production, and it doesn't rely us to import oil as sustainable air fuel from anywhere else. And actually, you could become a producer and start making money back on any investment that the UK government may feel it had to put in as a first resort. But I'll tell you right now, there are investors out there looking to invest in sustainable air fuel. We just need to find them. And they need to be given, confidence from this government that should they come into this, that they will back them to the degree to make it a success. Because it will, SAF isn't going anywhere. That is the future. Everybody across the industry recognises sustainable air fuel as the place to go.
Last question. How confident are you that the new jobs will be guaranteed for refinery workers currently facing redundancy?
So we have been working quite closely with the Scottish Government to develop what we're calling a just transition job transition protection a policy agreement. So we would obviously prefer, and we will start to look at that, to work with the companies to get some kind of agreement in place where anybody, so should they make people redundant but restart a site in 6 months' time, the people that they made redundant would get a guaranteed interview, for instance, back into that area of employment. What we're working on the Scottish Government just now is to look at how we can bring that in more forcibly into procurement and policy. So therefore, if you are going to make a bid for a piece of work off Project Willow, and we've got 30 people who are still redundant as a result of that, who match your skills base, they would be getting guaranteed some form of interview or at least an opportunity for a job in that market.
Have you got an idea what the expected employment gap might be?
Not this time, no. I mean, so as I said, that So the first redundancies, should this go through, will start to take place at the end of April. Then it'll be a managed place until they have done all their decommissioning and taken all their assets and things offline and cut all the wires, basically. This is a problem, by the way. They may start cutting wires, which would make it more difficult to get the conversion done. So, it's a staged approach, so people may find employment, but as I repeat to myself, in a shrinking economic market, which is Falkirk and Grangemouth, where there's a higher employment rate as it currently is, then it becomes about money, of course, and people earning the same amount of money, but it comes down to skills as well. And people, so if we're going to, so I think there's a real danger in Project Willow that if you start bringing things online in 3 and 4 years' time, what workers with those skills are you going to have? This is a generational skills community you've got who've built up skills over 10, 15, 20 years. So if they go and you're going to bring new stuff in, I don't know where you're going to get the skilled workforce to do it.
Just to really briefly look at, I think Derek speaks incredibly well and articulates it well on behalf of his members there, and he's obviously the expert on that area. I just want to say, just more broadly, what happens in Grangemouth is being watched by energy workers right across Scotland, and it really is a litmus test as to what government, what agencies can do when this happens. If those workers are let down, what confidence can we have in the next decade that the next group of workers are not going to be let down, and any pressure that can be brought to bear to make sure those workers are looked after will reap dividends across the board and give people confidence in the move towards net zero.
My colleague Kirstine Sullivan was trying to get from you a feel for how many workers are likely to be made redundant soon. You mentioned that some workers might be made redundant in April. Do you know how many workers that would be?
No, I can get that in to you. So there is how these things work is they've got a clear target of June 2025 to start the import terminal. So over that period of time, they will have a shutdown procedure that they go through, and certain aspects and certain job roles will no longer be required once that's done. And we have, because it is, there's some people who have said that they would like to go straight away, but they've been refused to go straight away because the company needs a specific job role.
People are being made, sorry to interrupt you, but if people are being made redundant in April, we must know at this point how many people that is likely to be.
Get you that information.
That'd be very helpful, thank you. Okay, that concludes the questions we wanted to put to you this morning. So thank you all very much indeed for coming along today. I'm sorry you've had the advantage of us in that we haven't had an opportunity at all to look at Project Willow, but we will do that, and we will in short order be taking evidence from Petroineos and others. So it'll be very interesting to pose some of these thoughts and ideas to them when we actually see them. So thank you again for coming along, and thank you for giving us your time, and we wish you well with the projects you're involved in.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.